I present tonight, I've asked some representatives from two of Portland's hack spaces, Aaron and Dean, to come and just talk briefly about some services in your community you might not know about but should. So, Aaron?
Thank you very much. My name is Aaron Ike. I am I guess a representative of a group called DorkBot PDX. DorkBot is a large organization that spans the globe, but our particular group, DorkBot PDX, has a motto, and that is doing strange things with electricity. It gives us the opportunity to, we meet together bi-weekly, so every other Monday, including this coming Monday, downtown Portland, and we just take some time, a couple of hours to kick back, relax, share projects with each other, ask questions, find solutions to problems that we're facing in our particular projects. We span all across knowledge levels. We have people who have never picked up a resistor or a microcontroller before. We have people who have been doing this in their entire lives. People who hold PhDs, people who have never been to college or finished high school. So everyone is welcome. We've had young kids come in sometimes. We have older folks come in. We go all across all kinds of different spectrums, and we have a lot of fun. We have some very interesting people show up. Paul Stoffergen invented a microcontroller that's compatible with Arduino programming called the Teensy. Ward Cunningham is famous for inventing this little piece of software called the Wiki that you may or may not have used. So I want to invite you all to come down and experience and get your hands at a place called Backspace in Portland. It's on 5th, just north of Burnside. And we're usually there 7 to 10 or so on every other Monday. And we'd really like you to come out and have some fun, ask me questions, and do some cool stuff. Thanks.
Thank you, Cory, for the opportunity. My name is Dean Pierce. I am currently the acting executive director of the Brain Silo Hackerspace in Portland. It's about a mile north of Rose Quarter, if you know where that is. And we have all sorts of fun things, anything soldered or 3D printed. We've got that gear just laying around. It's fun to play with. We have open house nights on Thursdays. Anyone can stop by. Mike, I could just lean in closer too. Is that either way? So, yeah, if anybody needs anything 3D printed or soldered or whatever, just stop by on a Thursday, and we're sure to be there. There's also events that happen at other points. If you become a member, which is pretty cheap, it's like $40 a month or something, and different things can be worked out, but then you get 24/7 access to the space, and so it's like a coffee shop where you don't have to be feeling guilty about not buying coffee. It's a positive experience, so I encourage you to stop by. I got these cards I'm going to pass around. It's good to look at because you will get lost if you don't have the card, because it's kind of between like an alley thing. But yep, okay, thank you.
Good evening and welcome to Powell's Books at Cedar Hills Crossing. We're here tonight with one of our favorite authors, Cory Doctorow. He is a co-editor of the weblog Boing Boing, as well as the author of numerous science fiction and young adult science fiction books and short stories. He has won multiple awards, including the John Campbell Award for Best New Author and the Locus Award. He is here tonight to promote his new book, a sequel to Little Brother, called Homecoming. Please welcome Cory Doctorow.
Oh, man, that's okay. Hi, folks. So we have, assuming that we want time for Q&A, which I think we do, there's enough time for me to either do the reading or a presentation, a little talk. So you get to choose. Show of hands, reading. Show of hands, presentation. All right. So it's a quick presentation, and I'm going to need a copy of the book to refer to. It's a quick presentation, and it starts with some recent history. So in February 2010, kid named Blake J. Robbins filed a lawsuit against his school district, which was the Lower Merion School District, Lower Merion, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia. It's an affluent suburb of Philadelphia, and they had enough money that the kids who went to that school were all issued MacBooks. These MacBooks were the only device they were allowed to connect to their school network. All of their assignments were delivered on the MacBooks. All their assignments had to be completed on the MacBooks. They had to bring the MacBooks home every night. They had to bring them back to school every day. And the event that precipitated Blake J. Robbins filing a lawsuit against the school district was that he was called into the principal's office. Now, he and the principal had some history. He'd had some disciplinary issues, and the principal said words to the effect of, Blake, I've got you now. You've been taking drugs. And Blake said, well, I don't take drugs. And the principal said, oh, yes, well, can you explain this? And he handed him a photo of himself in his bedroom the night before with what looked like a pill that he was putting into his mouth. And he said, that's a Mike and Ike's candy. I eat Mike and Ike's candies a lot at home. How did you get a picture of me in my bedroom? And what the school had done was outfitted these laptops with software that was anti-theft software. It was software that could operate the camera without turning on the little green light. And the idea was that if a laptop was stolen, they could use this to covertly identify the thief and recover the laptop. They didn't just use it for that because, you know, the gun on the mantelpiece in Act 1 has to go off by Act 3. Having created the facility to covertly watch students through their computers, they did. And it turned out they'd taken thousands of photos of their students, awake and asleep, dressed and undressed, at home and at school, with their parents present, without their parents present, with their younger siblings present, and so on. The school district stopped using this facility after the lawsuit, but there are school districts across America that do use it, and the difference is that they now all tell their students that they can covertly operate the webcam. And that's a theme that I'll return to in a moment. In November 2010, members of the Chaos Computer Club, which is a German hackerspace group, much like the hackerspace groups you heard from tonight, they discovered that the Bavarian government, the government of the state of Bavaria, had been illegally infecting people's laptops with a piece of malicious software they called the Bundestrojaner, the state Trojan. And what they would do is that there were people they wanted to spy on. They would take their computers and infect them with this software that would allow the government, the police, to covertly operate the camera, the microphone, to read the keystrokes and to photograph the screen or take images off the screen, read the files on the hard drive, and so on. And what's more, and this is again a theme I'm going to return to, the Bundestrojaner, once it was on your computer wasn't just something that the police and the government could watch through. It was so badly secured itself that anyone who knew that the Bundestrojaner was on your computer or could discover it there through like a network scanner could then hijack it and also watch through it. So you could walk into a Starbucks and scan for people who'd been infected by the government, and when you found them, you could take over their laptops, and wherever they went from then on, you could watch through their camera, listen through their microphone, read their keystrokes, and so on. In November 2011, security researcher named Trevor Eckhart found himself in receipt of legal threats from most of the major mobile phone carriers in America. What he had done was identified a piece of spyware called Carrier IQ that had been installed on 141 million phones before they were sold to Americans without the Americans' knowledge. And nominally this was software that monitored how the phone operated when it was out in the field, so it could determine where there were weak spots in the coverage. But what it also did was it told Carrier IQ where those 141 million Americans were at all time. It read their keystrokes, including their passwords, and it had the potential to access their storage, including the photos on the phone. Eventually, the phone companies had to come clean and admit what they'd done. But it was only because someone was allowed to look inside the phone that we found out. And if he hadn't been, it's likely that lots more people would have Carrier IQ on their devices. In September of 2012, back in Pennsylvania, a company called Designerware, which made security software for recovering stolen laptops, and 7 of its customers, which were rent-to-own companies that would sell you a laptop without charging you full price. You could pay a small amount of money every month, and after many years you would own the laptop. You'd pay, all in all, a lot more for that laptop than you would have if you bought it for cash, but it's a kind of laptop option of last recourse for people who are poor but don't want to be left behind by computers. Designerware and its 7 rent-to-own customers settled with the FTC. And in the settlement, they admitted that they had used the Designerware software to covertly record the laptop owners having sex, to covertly record their children in the nude, to covertly intercept their confidential medical discussions with their doctors and HMOs, to covertly intercept their banking passwords and logins, to covertly read the files on their hard drive, and to covertly intercept their privileged communications with their lawyers. And the Federal Trade Commission, much like the school districts after Lower Merion, the Federal Trade Commission said to these companies, you must stop this and never do it again unless you put it in the fine print. So long as there's something in the user agreement, the booklet you get with this that tells you all the things that you're agreeing to by buying this laptop and paying for it on the installment plan, that says we might be recording you having sex and your children in the nude. Once you've done that, once you've papered it over in the user agreement, you're good. So in 1986, the American government adopted its major anti-hacking statute, a law called the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And they wanted to make it illegal, as you might imagine, to take over and look at data on computers that you didn't own. But they needed some way to distinguish between someone who, say, had an account on a time-sharing system or a university mainframe and who used a computer they didn't own, and someone who broke into that computer. So the way that they kind of split that hair is they said, it's a felony to do things on a computer that you don't own where you are exceeding your authorization. If you're authorized to do something on a computer you don't own, that's fine. But once you exceed your authorization, you're a felon. And that may be overreaching, it might not be overreaching, but it certainly didn't anticipate that we would enter a world in which there were user license agreements on every single system we accessed, and in which all of us access systems every day that we didn't own. And many prosecutors and some courts have taken the point of view that if you get a long user license agreement when you access some computer, 20,000 words that say, you know, by accessing this computer you agree that, or, you know, using this service, you agree that, you know, we're allowed to come over to your house and punch your grandmother and wear your underwear and make long distance calls and clean out your fridge. If you violate any of those terms of service, you are exceeding your authorization on that computer, according to many American prosecutors, and you're therefore a felon. So what this means is that if you write one of these crazy one-sided contracts that just say, you know, by having the lack of intestinal fortitude to become my customer, I therefore get to punish you in all these myriad and disgusting ways, that having violated any of those terms, you're not just someone who has violated a contract and might be sued, you're a felon that the government might put in jail. And now I want to talk to you briefly about one of the people who fell afoul of this law. A young man you have heard a lot about recently, named Aaron Swartz. I met Aaron in the year 2000 when he was 14 years old. He was just a kid. He looked a lot younger than that. And he was coming to San Francisco where I lived, from Chicago where he lived, because he was contributing to one of the core internet standards, something called RSS, that kind of backstops podcasts and a lot of other kinds of data interchange formats. It's one of the core pieces of internet technology that is part of the services you use every day. So he was coming to town, and the woman I was dating at the time was his chaperone. She'd show him around, we'd take him out for dinner. And he was a clever kid, and we could see that he was going to go on and do lots of good things. And in 2005, he joined a company called Reddit, which many of you will have heard of and used, with the title of co-founder. He didn't actually co-found it, but he was a co-founder. And Reddit, when it was sold to Condé Nast to become part of initially it was going to be part of Wired, but it kind of spun out into its own thing. He didn't really like working in an office. He kind of engineered his own dismissal through basically gross public disobedience, and got cashed out and walked away from the company and decided to go, you know, do cool stuff with the rest of his young life. There was a lot of it ahead of him. So the stunt that he did next that I think a lot of people remembered him for was something to do with a federal government service called PACER. PACER is where we keep all the country's case law These are the decisions that the judges make when they interpret law. So someone is said to have broken a law, like the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Prosecutor brings a case before a judge. The judge reads the law, listens to the facts of the matter, looks at what all the other judges have said, and makes a decision. And that becomes part of our body of law, because the next judge will consider that judge's decision. And so you don't really know what the law is unless you can see what the judges have said, unless you can see the case law and the case files. That's a piece of the law. And so most countries, most reasonable people would say that if you are going to obey the law, you have to be able to see the law. You can't see the law, you can't be expected to obey the law. And back in ye olden days, when the case files were kind of hard to access and expensive, we set up this service called Pacer. The federal government set up this service called Pacer, which charged you 10 cents for every page because it was expensive to run computers. That's not the case anymore. This law is in the public domain, and it should be accessible to the public. There's no copyright on it. Of course, there's no copyright on it. It's the law. That would be crazy. But you still have to pay 10 cents a page to access it. So Aaron did something pretty cool. He worked with some people who developed a piece of software called Recap. And what Recap is, it's like an anagram of Pacer. What Recap is a rival service that's free. And every time you go to Pacer, if you have the Recap plugin in your browser, it takes any pages that you've paid for, copies them, and sticks them in Recap. And then when you request a page, it checks to see whether someone else has already paid to put it in Recap. And if you have, instead of charging you 10 cents, it grabs the free copy and sticks it in your browser. That way, the entire country only has to pay once to see any given page. Once one person has paid, then you're done, right? 10 cents, that page is free for everybody. Pay once, pay for all. So Aaron went and took the 20% of American case law that was most widely cited and stuck it in Recap. That was pretty cool. The FBI didn't like this. So they opened a case on him. They investigated him. They brought him in for questioning. They tried to get him to talk without his lawyer. And this is a public service announcement part of this. Don't talk to the police without your lawyer present. Aaron didn't talk to the police without his lawyer present. He was eventually became a free man. They couldn't pin anything on him, and he walked away with a big smile on his face. And a lot of people thought, well, that was pretty gutsy. And you know, he was young, he was overconfident, and he was a bit foolhardy. And in 2010, he set his sights on something called JSTOR. JSTOR was another service that, like Pacer, a lot of people had been talking about for many years as something of a bit of an anachronism in the 21st century. JSTOR is a repository for scholarly, academic, and technical journals. These are journals that have a lot of scientific and technical and scholarly works, that many of which have been produced at public expense through public universities, through government agencies. And you know, if the law is the source code, this is kind of the core dump of the world, right? This is the stuff that explains what the world is doing. And it's pretty important to know what the world is doing, because every couple of years we vote on people who have theories about what the world is doing and how they're going to fix it. And given that a lot of this stuff was paid for with public money, and given that not knowing what's in it represents in some important way a drag on the public's ability to know and make good choices, a lot of people felt that it was pretty silly that this wasn't widely available. And apparently so did Aaron, because he started to download lots and lots of JSTOR documents from the MIT network. He walked onto their campus, used their public Wi-Fi that they made available to all people, and started downloading documents. And they did some stuff to try and block him. They could see that someone was doing something funny. So he went into a wiring closet at MIT. Now the newspaper reports made it look like he kind of snuck in to a secret facility, maybe picked a lock or something. He went into a closet that the public routinely accessed. Actually, there's a homeless man who kept his clothes in that closet. But he went in and he put a laptop in, he hid his face, he plugged it into the network, and he downloaded millions of documents. And they caught him, and they charged him with Computer Fraud and Abuse Act violations. And he was facing 30 to 50 years in prison. There was a prosecutor who really didn't like him and made it very clear that she intended that he would go to jail. And, you know, this is a long, slow process, the justice process. So years went by while this hung over his head, and, you know, he did his best to put it behind him and did some other stuff. He decided that he would set his sights next on a terrible internet copyright law called SOPA. SOPA was pretty bananas. SOPA had, you'll remember SOPA. SOPA was the day that none of the kids in America could do their homework because they shut off Wikipedia. SOPA is a service, or SOPA was a law that said that if you allowed people to talk to each other on the internet, if you had a place where people could post messages, that you would be responsible for policing that for copyright infringement, or you would be liable for copyright infringement. But policing it didn't just mean that you would make sure that there were no copyrighted works posted to the message board. It meant that you would make sure that nobody ever linked to a website that had links to another website that infringed on copyright. Which is to say, you know, you've got a little message board where your Little League team or your sewing circle or whatever talks about what's going on in your lives and when the next game is, and someone posts a link to Facebook. You, as the person who runs that website, are now responsible for making sure that no one on Facebook ever links to a website that infringes on copyright. Right? So that's a standard that nobody could rise to. It would be the end of our ability to talk to each other on the internet. It would turn the internet into a kind of glorified video-on-demand service where only big companies could talk to us and we couldn't talk to each other. And so Aaron pulled off a breathtaking series of activist moves along with a group of people called Fight for the Future and many other activist groups around America, and got 8 million people to write to their congressman. I was in DC the week before the SOPA debates started in Congress, and I talked to all my friends on the Hill, and they all said, you know what, don't bother. It's a lock. There's no way you're going to win this one. They've counted the votes. They've got the signatures. It's over. This is going to be the law. You know, they've got their ducks in a row. This is it. And yet, it turns out that if you get enough people to call their senators and congressmen, that the senators and congressmen who rely on corporate money to get elected realize that they also rely on voters to get elected. And they can be moved, even in the face of people who, even in the face of certainty. So last month, January the 11th, was the second anniversary of when Aaron was arrested and charged with all of these felonies. And it was the day that he hanged himself in Brooklyn, which is why we've heard so much about Aaron. The laws that Aaron was charged under were just some of the internet laws that we have that don't really treat with the internet as though it were the nervous system of the information society, and instead treat it as some kind of, you know, fillip, a little finial on the rump of our world, maybe a kind of entertainment system, or a little thing off to the edge where we keep our infrastructure going, but not something that we all use every day for everything. And another one of those laws is the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which was passed in 1998. It was passed to modernize American copyright law to keep up with the digital age. And one of the provisions in the Digital Millennium Copyright Act is what's called the anti-circumvention provision. And that's the law that makes it illegal to change a device such that you are then capable of seeing all the data held in that device and changing what that device does. So if you have a device, a phone, a laptop, a set-top box, a games console, and somewhere in that is a program that stops you from accessing all of the data or stops you from running any program you want to run. If somewhere in there there's like a HAL 9000 program whose job it is to kind of swim up out of the depths when you violate the terms of service and say, I can't let you do that, Dave. It's against the law to disable that program. It's against the law to tell people how to disable that program, and it's against the law to give people information that might help them disable that program. And that has been a huge problem because the devices that we use every day have all kinds of locks on them, and those locks are designed necessarily to hide their operation from their owners, because if you put a lock on a device and you show, and that lock is an icon on the desktop called HAL9000.exe, then the owner will just drag it into the trash. So these devices have to be designed, once you've got locks in them, they have to be designed to hide what they're doing from the people who own the devices, you and me. The people who put the devices in our pockets, the people who whisper our most intimate secrets into them. So every 3 years the Copyright Office meets to decide whether or not this is working, and to evaluate whether or not it should make some exceptions, to say, oh, maybe right now you should be allowed to unlock games consoles for the purpose of archiving video games if you're a library. We'll make that exception. So 3 years ago, they made the exception that if you wanted to unlock a phone so that you could change carriers, you should be allowed to. It didn't last, though. This year, they met again, and they said, well, that 3 years was an interesting experiment, but we're putting phones back in phone jail. You're no longer allowed to legally unlock a phone. First offense carries a maximum $500,000 fine and 5 years in jail. Second offense carries a maximum $1 million fine and 10 years in jail. Incidentally, those are longer than the likely sentence that you would get if you sent your phone into more illegal to carriers than it is to turn your phone into a bomb. Now, the future that we live in is being designed today. We are designing our future with everything we do in our present. And the question that will determine the shape of our future is this: do we get to tell the machines what to do, or do they get to tell us what to do? Do we get to see what's inside them, or is it against the law to see what's inside? These are important questions. They're a matter of life and death sometimes. In November 2012, a security researcher who goes by the name of Barnaby Jack gave a presentation in Australia about some research he'd done into implanted defibrillators. These are devices that are implanted into the chest cavities of people who have weak hearts. They detect when your heart has stopped beating, and they deliver a little electric shock to your heart to get it beating again rhythmically. And they have wireless interfaces so that doctors can get readings off of them. It's awfully hard to stick a wire into a device that's attached to your heart. They have wireless interfaces so that you can update their software, because you sometimes want to add new features to their devices. And Barnaby Jack had discovered that with these wireless interfaces, you could reprogram these devices. They weren't very well designed. And you could reprogram to do things like scan for other devices and reprogram them, and or you could design them to deliver lethal shocks to the people who had them implanted in their chest cavities. So you could do both. For a while, scan for everyone you meet and infect them with a copy of this malicious payload, and then at some date in the future, give everybody who's come in range of you or anyone you come in range with a lethal shock. It's important to know what the devices that you use are doing, and it's important that we are able to look inside them and tell people what we found. So, when I was writing Homeland, I knew that a big piece of this is the book I'm touring with. It's the sequel to Little Brother, and I knew that a big piece of this book would be about next generation political campaigning. How would you run a political campaign in the era of the internet such that you could be an independent candidate and not end up in the pocket of people with a lot of money who funded your campaign? And so I knew that there was one person who'd really be able to help me with this, and this was Aaron, because Aaron had done such interesting things with the Stoke and Speaker campaign. So I sent him an email and said, what have you got? What are you thinking about? Have you got any ideas for how to do this? And I thought he'd send me back to look at. Instead, he sent me back within an hour a kind of fully developed design document for what he called a vote machine that would help people get votes because other people believed in what they had to say without having to go on bended knee to moneyed interests who would then hold you to account after you got elected. Something that would let people get elected who only owed a debt to the people who voted for them, not to battery figures with lots of money. And he wrote it out, and I literally almost word for word just pasted it straight into this, except for the last line, which is, I've got to go now, I've got to go build this. And in fact, the last commit that Aaron made in the open source project to Git was to a project that's closely related to it. So he did. He went off to work on this stuff. But I also wanted something else from him. Little Brother had two afterwards, one from Bunny Clan, who hacked the Xbox, and one from this kind of security researcher. And I knew I wanted two afterwards from him. And so I asked Jake Applebaum, who's with WikiLeaks and helped the core project do its thing. I asked him for an afterwards, he wrote me a great one. And then I wrote to Aaron and I said, could you write me an open letter to a kid like you, 13 or 14 today, and tell them what you think they should be doing about the future? And again, an hour later, he wrote back with something quite good, something I'm going to read to you tonight. I know it's easy to feel like you're powerless, like there's nothing you can do to slow down or stop the system. Like all the calls are made by shadows and powerful forces far outside your control. I feel that way too sometimes, but it just isn't true. A little over a year ago, a friend called to tell me about an obscure bill he heard of called the Combating Online Infringement and Counterfeit Act, or COICA. As I read the bill, I started to get more and more worried.
Under its provisions, the government will be allowed to censor websites it didn't like without so much as a trial. It would be the first time the U.S. government was given the power to censor its citizens' access to the net. The bill had been introduced a day or two before, but it already had a couple of dozen senators co-sponsoring it. And despite there never having been any debate, it was already scheduled for a vote in just a couple of days. Nobody had ever reported on it, but that was the point. They wanted to rush this thing through before anybody noticed. Luckily, my friend noticed. We stayed up all weekend and launched a website explaining what the bill did with a petition that you could sign opposing it that would look up the phone numbers for your representatives. We told a few friends about it, and they told a few friends about it, and within a couple of days, we had over 200,000 people on our petition. It was incredible. Well, the people pushing this bill didn't stop. They spent literally tens of millions of dollars lobbying for it. The head of every major media company flew out to Washington, D.C., and met with the president's chief of staff to politely remind them of the millions of dollars they donated to the president's campaign to explain that they wanted, the only thing they wanted, was for this bill to pass. But the public pressure kept building. To try to throw people off the trail, they kept changing the name of the bill. They called it HIPAA and SOPA, and even the E-Parasite Act. But no matter what they called it, more and more people kept telling their friends about it and getting more and more people opposed. Soon the signers and our petition spread to millions. We managed to stall them for over a year through various tactics, but they realized that if they waited much longer, they might never get a chance to pass this bill. So they scheduled it for a vote first thing after they got back from winter break. But while members of Congress were off on winter break, holding town halls and public meetings back home, people started visiting them. Across the country, members started getting asked by their constituents why they were supporting that nasty internet censorship bill. And members started getting scared. Some went so far as to respond by attacking me. But it wasn't about me anymore. It was never about me. From the beginning, it was about citizens taking things into their own hands, making YouTube videos and writing songs opposing the bill, making graphs showing how much money the bill's co-sponsors had received from the industry pushing for it, and organizing boycotts, putting pressure on the companies that endorsed the bill. And it worked. It took the bill from a political non-issue that was poised to pass unanimously to a toxic football that no one wanted to touch. Even the bill's co-sponsors started rushing to issue statements opposing it. Boy, were those media moguls pissed. This is not how the system is supposed to work. A ragtag bunch of kids doesn't stop one of the most powerful forces in Washington just by typing on their laptops. But it did happen, and you can make it happen again. The system is changing. Thanks to the internet, everyday people can learn about and organize around an issue, even if the system is determined to ignore it. Now, maybe we won't win every time. This is real life after all. But we finally have a chance. But it only works if you take part. So, we live in a world that is made of computers and networks. This building is a computer we put our bodies into. If you take the computers out of this building, it would be uninhabitable in a month. Your house is a computer you put your body into. Your car is a computer you put your body into that hurtles you down the highway at 60 miles an hour. A 747 is a flying Solaris box filled with badly secured SCADA networks. I'm a member of the Walkman generation. Some of you are members of the iPod generation. When I get old enough, I'm going to need a hearing aid. So are you.